Everyone's fighting over generators and plywood. They're wrong. The aisles that actually keep you alive in a regional crisis aren't in the grocery store. They're not even in the sections of the hardware store you'd think to check. Grocery shelves empty in 6 to 12 hours. That's documented. But hardware stores hold deep inventory 24 to 48 hours longer. Not because the stock is infinite, because civilians don't know what they're looking at. 7 items, all under $20 each. Total cart under $75. Every phase of a grid-down disruption covered. And one of them is a $3 plumbing part that military water supply doctrine treats as mission critical. Let's go. Item 1. 5-gallon bucket with lid. $4 to $6. You're not buying a bucket, you're buying a 40-pound water container, a sanitation station, a wash basin, a filtration housing frame, and dry food storage in one object. That's 5 survival functions for the cost of a coffee. Here's the physics. One 5-gallon bucket holds 40 pounds of water. That's a full day's supply for 2 people at the minimum consumption rate the military uses for planning in field environments. FM 1052 lays this out. Water supply in theaters of operations. The planning factor is 1 gallon per person per day for drinking alone. 2 gallons when you account for cooking and basic hygiene. 1 bucket. 1 day. 2 people. Now look at what civilians do. They buy cases of bottled water. 24-pack of half-liter bottles. That gives you roughly 3 gallons. Costs you $5 to $7. A 5-gallon bucket gives you 5 gallons of capacity for $4. You're paying roughly 7 cents per gallon of capacity versus $2 per gallon with bottles. That's not a minor difference. That's a factor of almost 30. And bottles are single-use. You drink them, and they're gone. A bucket refills from any water source. Rain, creek, snowmelt. Tap while pressure still holds. It refills, and it keeps working. But storage is just the first function. You line the bucket with a trash bag, and you've got a field sanitation toilet. This is straight out of FM 2176. The Army Survival Manual. When municipal sewage fails, and it fails when the power does, you need a contained sanitation system or you're breeding disease vectors inside your own shelter. Dysentery, cholera, bacterial infection. All of them documented in every major domestic disaster after action report from Katrina forward. The bucket solves that. Same bucket with a cloth stretched across the top becomes a rough pre-filter for sediment. Same bucket with a perforated inner container becomes a biofilter housing. Same bucket flipped over becomes a wash basin stand. 1 item. 5 functions. $4. Running total. $4 to $6. I've put together a complete guide on crisis supply fundamentals covering everything you need to know. First link in the description, worth printing while you still have a connection. Item 2. 6mm clear plastic sheeting. $8 to $12 for a roll. This is one of the most undervalued materials in any disaster scenario, and you'll find it sitting untouched in the paint and drop cloth aisle while people fight over tarps too. Aisles away. Here's why the mil thickness matters. 6 mil is the minimum specification that gives you structural durability for shelter application. Anything thinner tears under wind load or foot traffic. Anything thicker costs more without proportional benefit for emergency use. 6 mil is the specification that military field engineers use as the baseline for expedient construction. The clear material is critical. Unlike a blue tarp, clear sheeting transmits solar radiation. That means it functions as a greenhouse layer when you use it as a shelter wall or window covering. Passive solar heating, no fuel, no battery, no resupply dependency. Now the rain catchment math. A 10 by 10 foot sheet angled into a collection point captures roughly 6 gallons of water per inch of rainfall. The average storm in most regions drops 1 to 2 inches. That's 6 to 12 gallons of water from a single rain event with a piece of plastic you bought for $10. You'd need to buy 3 cases of bottled water to match that. At $6 a case, you're at $18 for water you still can't replenish. The sheeting gives you a system, not a product. Other functions. Ground barrier for insulation. You lose body heat to the ground 25 times faster than to the air at the same temperature. That's conductive heat transfer. Military doctrine hammers this in cold weather training, a layer of plastic between you and the ground cuts that transfer significantly. Vapor barrier for shelter walls. Solar's still component for water purification when paired with a collection container. Wound isolation barrier in a medical situation. Civilians buy one tarp for $15 to $20 and it does 2 things. You buy a roll of sheeting for $10 and it does 6 things. Running total, $12 to $18. Item 3. Reflective foil insulation roll, $8 to $15 for a 25-foot roll. You'll find this in the insulation aisle, not the emergency supply section, not the camping aisle, the insulation aisle. The same material contractors use as a radiant barrier in attics. Here's the specification that matters. Reflective foil returns up to 97% of radiant heat back toward its source. That's not marketing. That's physics. Radiant heat transfer accounts for the majority of heat loss in an uninsulated space. When you hang foil insulation on the wall behind a heat source, you're redirecting energy that would otherwise pass through the wall and disappear. 1 room. Foil on the walls. A single candle or body heat from 2 adults can raise the ambient temperature several degrees in an enclosed space lined with this material. Now compare that to what civilians buy. Emergency space blankets. Mylar, $2 to $3 each. They tear the first time you unfold them. They tear if you look at them aggressively. They're single use in any real scenario. A foil insulation roll gives you 25 linear feet of material that you can cut, tape, reuse, and configure for multiple applications. Shelter liner. Room insulation. Ground pad for sleeping. Signal panel for rescue visibility. You tear off a 3-foot section and hang it behind you while you sleep. Your own body heat reflects back at you instead of radiating into the room. That's the dead airspace principle that every cold weather manual references. TC 21.3 covers this in detail. The roll costs the same as 3 space blankets and gives you 20 times the usable material. Cost per function isn't even a comparison. It's an embarrassment. Running total, $20 to $33. Item 4. Polypropylene utility rope, 100 feet. $5 to $8. Not Paracord. Polypropylene. Here's why. Polypropylene is hydrophobic. The fibers don't absorb water. That means when it gets wet, and it will get wet, it retains its rated strength. It doesn't swell. It doesn't freeze rigid. It doesn't lose half its load capacity because it rained for 6 hours. Every knot you tie holds. Every lashing you build stays tight. Now here's what civilians buy instead. Paracord bracelets, 6 feet of usable cordage in a $20 fashion accessory. You need 50 feet minimum to build 1 basic A-frame shelter. 6 feet gets you nothing. It's a bracelet. 100 feet of polypropylene costs you $5 to $8 and covers shelter ridge lines, guy lines, load securing, gear lashing, clotheslines for drying wet garments, and perimeter tripwires if you need awareness around your position. Wet garments are a hypothermia vector. FM 2176 is explicit about this. Drying capability isn't a luxury. It's a thermal management protocol. String your line inside your shelter space where your heat source can accelerate evaporation. 1 rope, 1 system. $5 to $8. Running total, $25 to $41. Item 5. Fire redundancy. A butane lighter multipack and a ferro rod. Combined cost, $8 to $12. This is a two-system approach. Butane lighters work in fair conditions. Quick ignition. Minimal skill required. But butane fails below freezing. Lighters crack. Fuel doesn't vaporize properly. Wind kills the flame. That's one failure mode for one system. The ferro rod covers everything the lighter can't. It throws sparks at over 5,000 degrees. It works wet. It works frozen. It works at altitude. It has no fuel to deplete. 10,000 strikes on a standard rod. Two systems. Two failure modes that don't overlap. That's redundancy, not backup. Redundancy. Now look at the civilian approach. One tactical lighter, $40 to $60. Windproof. Refillable. Impressive. And it has one failure mode. When the fuel runs out or the ignition mechanism breaks, you have zero fire capability. A $40 single point of failure. You're buying two ignition systems that cover every weather condition for under $12. The multi-pack gives you 5 to 7 individual lighters. Distribute them. One in your kit, one in your vehicle, one cached in your shelter location. The ferro rod lives on your person at all times. It's your system of last resort, and it never runs out in any time frame that matters. Running total, $33 to $53. Item 6. Here's where it gets interesting. This is the one. Write this down. PVC ball valve. 3/4 inch. $2 to $4. This is a $3 plumbing part sitting in an aisle you've never walked down. And it's one of the most critical water management components in military field doctrine. Here's why. Every military water distribution point, every water buffalo trailer you've ever seen on a base or at a field exercise uses a valve-based gravity dispensing system. Not a pump, not a spigot connected to pressure. A valve. Gravity pushes water down. The valve controls flow. You open it, water comes out. You close it, water stops. No waste. No contamination from hands dipping into an open container. No tipping a 5-gallon bucket and losing a gallon on the ground every time someone needs a drink. FM 534, Engineer Field Data, outlines gravity-fed water distribution as the standard for field operations where pressure systems aren't available. This is the exact principle. Now here's the combination build. You take your 5-gallon bucket from item 1. You drill a 3/4 inch hole near the base. You thread the ball valve in with a rubber washer on each side. You elevate the bucket on any stable surface. You now have a controlled gravity-fed water dispenser for under $15 total. Attach 3 feet of tubing, and you can direct flow into bottles, cups, canteens, or cooking vessels without touching the water supply. No hands in the water. No open container exposure to airborne contaminants. No waste from pouring. This is the item that separates someone who's storing water from someone who has a water distribution system. And nobody thinks of it. Nobody. Because it's a plumbing part. It lives in the plumbing aisle, and civilians don't walk the plumbing aisle during a crisis. They walk the bottled water aisle, and the generator aisle, and the flashlight aisle. The ball valve sits untouched on a hook for $3 while everything around it sells out. One part. Complete water management upgrade. Running total, $35 to $57. Item 7. Heavy-duty contractor trash bags, 3 mil thickness. A box of 20 costs $6 to $10, not kitchen bags, not tall kitchen bags. Contractor grade, 3 mil. The same bags demolition crews use to haul broken drywall and concrete debris. They don't tear. They don't puncture on rough ground. They don't fail when you actually need them to hold. Here's what 20 bags give you. Waterproof gear covers. You put your dry clothing, your sleeping insulation, your fire supplies inside a contractor bag and they stay dry. Rain, flooding, groundwater seepage. Doesn't matter. 3 mil polyethylene doesn't let water through. Emergency rain poncho. Cut a head hole and 2 arm slits. You've got a waterproof outer layer that costs 50 cents. Compare that to a purpose-built emergency poncho at $5 to $8 that tears at the seams the second it catches on a branch. Sanitation liners. This connects back to your bucket from item 1. Line the bucket with a contractor bag, use it as a field toilet, tie off the bag when it's full, dispose of it properly. This is the sanitation protocol from every FEMA disaster manual and military field hygiene doctrine. NBC defense training covers waste isolation as a disease prevention fundamental. Without it, you're creating a biological hazard inside your own shelter within 72 hours. Ground sheet. Between your body and the surface. Cuts conductive heat loss. Remember the 25 times factor. This is your barrier. Improvised insulation layer. Fill a contractor bag loosely with dry leaves, crumpled newspaper, or any dry material. Stuff it inside your clothing or lay it over your body as a blanket. Dead airspace insulation. The same principle that makes a down sleeping bag work. The bag traps the material traps air, the air insulates you. Documented survival technique from SEER training. 1 bag. 6 functions. 50 cents per unit. That's cost per capability that nothing in the prepper industry comes close to matching. Running total. $41 to $67. 7 item. $41 to $67 depending on your local pricing. Full coverage across the entire failure cascade. Power fails. Water pressure drops. Communications degrade. Resupply breaks down. You've got water storage and distribution. Shelter and insulation. Sanitation. Fire. Weather protection. Ground insulation. Every phase covered. Not with 15 separate products from a survival catalog, with 7 items from a hardware store that most people walk past without a second look. Civilians buy products, you just bought materials. And materials don't have a single purpose. They have as many purposes as you have the knowledge to apply. I've written up a broader guide on building real preparedness capability from the ground up, and it's linked below for when you don't have signal to look anything up. So what's the one item on this list you already had sitting in your garage and never thought of this way? Drop it in the comments.